When you close your eyes and picture a cave woman, what do you see? Maybe something from an old movie: perfect hair, a neatly cut fur bikini, and flawless skin despite living in the dirt. Hollywood made you believe cave women were wild supermodels who somehow had time for smoky eyeliner and a skincare routine made from mammoth fat. But let's take a deep breath and forget that fantasy. The truth is, cave women were not glamorous. They were tired. Really tired. Their life was not an adventure full of romantic drumbeats and heroic cavemen. It was survival. Plain, simple survival. No fur bikini looked clean after weeks of smoke, dirt, and animal grease. No shiny hair stayed shiny when there was no shampoo. And no, they did not walk around looking like they were about to star in a prehistoric fashion show. They were busy trying not to die. Imagine waking up inside a dark, damp cave. The floor is cold. Your blanket is an animal hide that smells like it still remembers the animal it once was. There is no alarm clock. Instead, you wake up to the sound of someone coughing, a baby crying, or worse, growls from outside. There's no time to stretch lazily and sip warm tea. The moment you open your eyes, you are already thinking, where will we get food today? Will it rain? Will someone get sick? Will something try to eat us? And let's talk about hygiene for a moment. Forget toothpaste. Forget hot showers. Forget soap. A cave woman's morning routine was closer to drink a sip of water if you have any. Maybe scrape off the dirt stuck to your arms and pray you don't have fleas. If you were lucky, there was a nearby stream. But guess what? That same stream was probably where animals drank, bathed, and left their mess. So no, there was no sparkling clear water waiting for you. Then came the big daily question: what are we eating? Cave women didn't have kitchens, grocery stores, or even a predictable meal plan. Breakfast was whatever you could find. Maybe some berries if the season was right. Maybe some leftover meat from a hunt. Maybe nothing at all. And every time they ate something new, there was a small but real fear. Will this make me sick? Will I die if I eat this? Imagine that kind of stress just to chew on a handful of leaves, and the cave woman was not just responsible for herself. She usually had children hanging on to her, babies crying in the corner, or elders needing care. She was a nurse, a cook, a babysitter, and a survival expert all rolled into one without any training. If someone got hurt, she had to figure out how to heal them. If someone got sick, she hoped herbs or rest would help because there were no doctors, no medicine, and no pain relief. And when her partner went out hunting and didn't come back for days, she worried in silence, still trying to keep everyone alive. Now, let's crush another myth. Cave women did not just sit around waiting for men to bring home the food. Archaeologists say they worked just as hard. They gathered plants, seeds, roots, and nuts. They made tools. They kept the fire alive because if the fire died, it wasn't easy to make a new one. They also helped hunt when needed. So while the movies show them looking helpless and swooning over muscular cavemen, the truth is they were just as busy, just as strong, and just as exhausted. And let's not forget the danger. Every single day carried a risk. A lion could wander too close. A wolf could smell food. A snake could bite while you were reaching for berries. Even the weather was an enemy. Cold winds, heavy rain, or a sudden drought could ruin everything. So on top of being tired, hungry, and unwashed, cave women lived with a constant layer of fear. Sleep was never truly peaceful. Did they ever have fun? Probably, but not the way we think. Maybe they sang around the fire. Maybe they told simple stories about spirits, animals, or the stars. Maybe they laughed at silly things their children did. But there was no free time like we know it today. Every moment was about survival. And if they ever had a quiet moment to themselves, it was probably spent staring at the cave walls, wondering if life would ever get easier. Spoiler, it did in single quotes T.O. And one more thing, there were no mirrors. So cave women didn't even know if they looked beautiful or not. They didn't care. They didn't have beauty standards like modern people. Survival was the only priority. You didn't have time to worry about a bad hair day when your main goal was not becoming dinner for a saber-toothed tiger. So next time you see a cartoon or a movie showing a gorgeous cave woman in perfectly cut animal skin, just smile and remember the truth. Life back then was messy, it was exhausting, it was boring, and it was dangerous. There was no romance in waking up on a cold stone floor. There was no glamour in scratching flea bites while grinding seeds with a rock. And no, there was definitely no time to practice a sultry stare while a wild beast growled outside the cave. So let's set the record straight. Cave women were survivors, not fashion icons. They were strong because they had no choice. They were busy because doing nothing meant death. And they were far too tired to care about looking good while running from a predator. So forget the fur bikinis. Forget the neat hair. Forget the shiny movie version. The real cave woman was a hard-working, sleep-deprived, dirt-covered human just trying to live another day. And with that thought, let's end this chapter softly. Close your eyes and imagine the real picture. No makeup, no clean clothes. Just a tired woman sitting by a dim fire, holding her child close, staring at the dark cave entrance, hoping nothing with sharp teeth walks in. So no, they didn't have time to look glamorous while avoiding saber-toothed tigers. The day for a cave woman didn't begin with a pleasant alarm tone or the smell of fresh coffee. It began with light. As the sun slowly pushed its rays across the entrance of the cave, the darkness faded and life stirred. Sometimes it wasn't the sunlight that woke them. Sometimes it was the sharp cry of a baby or the scratchy growl of an animal outside. Either way, there was no slow, gentle start. Morning was the signal for work to begin. When a cave woman opened her eyes, she didn't see a soft bed with warm blankets. She saw a hard, uneven stone floor or a pile of dried grass that poked at her skin. The air was cold. The smell of last night's fire still clung to the space, mixed with the scent of damp earth and people. No one said, "Good morning," with a smile. There was no time for pleasantries. Before anything else, she checked the fire. If the fire had gone out during the night, it was bad news. Making a new one was hard. So the first task was to gently blow on the faint embers, coaxing them back to life. A weak little flame was precious. It meant warmth. It meant cooked food. It meant safety from the darkness. So imagine her crouched by the hearth, half awake, carefully feeding twigs into a sleepy fire. After that came the water problem. There were no taps, no buckets of clean water waiting nearby. If they were lucky, they had a small clay pot filled from yesterday. If not, someone had to go fetch it from a stream or a river. And the water wasn't always clear. Sometimes it was muddy, full of floating leaves, or shared by animals. Still, it was all they had, and forget toothpaste or a refreshing splash of soap and water. A cave woman's morning wash was more like rubbing her hands on a damp cloth, if she even had one. There were no mirrors. She couldn't see the tangles in her hair or the smudges of dirt on her face. And honestly, it didn't matter. No one cared. Survival didn't require neatness. Then came the real work. Children needed attention. Little ones cried for food. Older ones wandered dangerously close to the edge of the cave or the nearby bushes. So the cave woman became a caretaker before she even fully woke up. She tied a baby to her hip with a strip of animal hide. She handed a scrap of food to a child to keep them quiet. She hushed and soothed them while her own stomach rumbled. Now the main task of the day began: finding food. No, there was no kitchen stocked with supplies. No bread, no fruit basket, no coffee. A cave woman had to figure out what could be eaten that day. She remembered which plants were safe. She scanned the ground for berries, nuts, or roots. Some days she found something small. Some days nothing at all. If the men were out hunting, she didn't wait idly. She helped gather plants or even joined the group to catch small animals like rabbits or birds. Her eyes were always scanning, always searching. Food wasn't just about taste, it was about living one more day. And every step outside the cave came with danger. A simple trip for roots could turn into a chase if a wild animal appeared. Back in the cave, she also had other chores. The tools needed sharpening. The hides needed scraping to make them softer. Maybe she was making a sling for carrying a baby, or weaving simple ropes from grass. There was no "I'll do it later" because later wasn't guaranteed. Every little task kept the family alive. Let's pause for a moment and think, how do you start your morning? Maybe with a shower, maybe with breakfast, maybe with a quick scroll on your phone. A cave woman had none of that. She woke up already. In survival mode, there was no time for comfort, no time for relaxation, just a list of things that had to be done or else life would become harder, and there were no quiet moments. Children followed her everywhere. Babies clung to her side. Toddlers tugged at her legs. Older kids asked questions, cried, or got into trouble. So while she gathered firewood or sorted seeds, she also kept an eye on every little movement around. She was a multitasker before they even existed, and the cave itself, it wasn't cozy, it was cold and damp. If it had rained during the night, the entrance might be slippery. If the wind was strong, it blew straight inside. So no, there was no morning coffee, no toothpaste, no fresh clothes, just survival, plain and simple. She woke with the sun, fed the fire, gathered food, soothed children, and faced a world that wanted to take everything from her. When you think about it, that morning routine was more exhausting than anything we know today, and yet it was normal for her. It was the only way to live. So the next time you complain about your early alarm or your busy schedule, remember the cave woman. She didn't just wake up to work, she woke up to stay alive. And with that thought, let your eyes grow heavy. Because at least tonight, you don't have to wake to the sound of predators growling outside your door. Morning in the cave was never about deciding between pancakes or cereal. It was about deciding whether there was anything at all to eat. For a cave woman, breakfast didn't mean a plate of warm food waiting by the fire. It meant another day of searching, another day of hoping nature would be kind. There was no fridge to open, no cupboard to check. The only storage was what they had left from the previous day. Maybe a strip of dried meat if the last hunt was successful. Maybe a handful of seeds or nuts. Or maybe nothing at all except hunger. So the day began with choices. Stay near the cave and gather what you can, or risk walking farther to find something better. Both options came with trouble. Staying close meant less food. Going far meant more danger. Foraging wasn't easy. You had to know which plants were safe and which ones could hurt you. A bush full of shiny berries might look tempting, but one wrong bite could make you sick or worse. There were no books, no guides, no science. Knowledge came from memory, from trial and error passed down from the older women. Imagine crouching in the dirt, peering at a patch of green leaves, trying to remember if these were the safe ones. Did the last person who ate these survive? Or did they get dizzy and never wake up? It was a daily gamble, and the humor, if you could call it that, was dark. Because if you got it wrong, if you picked the pretty berries that weren't so friendly, well, natural selection took care of the rest. The people who made too many bad choices simply didn't survive long enough to pass on their mistakes. Sometimes they were lucky. They found roots they could dig up and roast. Sometimes there were nuts or seeds that had fallen from trees. Sometimes a patch of wild berries had ripened overnight, but other times the land was empty. No berries, no roots, no easy food. Just dry soil and disappointment. And let's not forget they weren't the only ones looking for food. Animals foraged, too. Birds, deer, even other humans could have beaten you to the best spots. So you might walk a long way only to find stripped branches and empty bush. If you did manage to gather something, there was still more work. Roots had to be scraped and cooked to be edible. Nuts had to be cracked with stones. Berries had to be carefully sorted, because even one poisonous one mixed with the rest could ruin the whole meal dot, and if there was meat left from the last hunt, it wasn't exactly fresh, it smelled, it was tough. It had to be cooked again to make it safe, that when you were hungry, you didn't complain. You were just glad it was there. Breakfast was never a quiet, peaceful moment. Children were hungry too. Babies cried, pulling at their mother's skin for milk. Older kids sat close, waiting, asking again and again, is there food? A cave woman had to feed herself last, making sure her little ones got something first. Sometimes, breakfast was just a sip of water. Sometimes it was chewing on a tough root while hoping for a better meal later. And sometimes it was nothing at all. Hunger was a familiar feeling. It stayed with you like a shadow. Compare that to today. You open a fridge and sigh because you're bored of what's inside. You scroll through endless menus and complain there's nothing good. A cave woman would have laughed at that. For her, breakfast was a lottery. Some days you won, some days you lost, and while gathering food, she also had to watch for danger. Snakes liked to curl around bushes. Wild cats could stalk from the trees. Even another human group could be hiding nearby, ready to steal what you found. So she moved carefully, listening to every sound. If she was lucky enough to return with food, it wasn't eaten in silence. It was eaten fast. There was no table, no plates, just hands and maybe a flat stone to crush soft berries into a paste. Everyone shared, and everyone knew it wouldn't be enough to last long. And if there was nothing, then the family went hungry until later in the day, when maybe the hunters returned with meat. Or maybe they didn't. Hunger was always waiting. It taught patience. It taught fear. It taught resilience. And yet, despite the hard mornings, they survived. They learned to read the land. They remembered which plants grew where and in which season. They learned from mistakes. Slowly, bit by bit, they understood nature's patterns, but still, it was never easy. Imagine standing under the early sun, holding a baby in one arm, scratching at the dirt with the other hand, praying you'd find something. Imagine walking back with a handful of leaves, knowing it wouldn't fill anyone's stomach, but it was all you had. No coffee, no bread, no comfort, just whatever the earth gave you. So yes, breakfast was more like a game of chance. You didn't always win, but you kept playing because there was no other choice. And yet, in all this struggle, there was a strange rhythm. Wake up, tend the fire, search for food, eat if you're lucky, repeat tomorrow. It was simple in a way. Hard, but simple. So the next time you complain about having nothing to eat, remember the cave woman staring at a half-empty bush, wondering if the last berry was safe. Remember her quietly hoping the roots she pulled wouldn't make her sick. Remember her handing food to her children first, even if it meant she went hungry. She didn't get to choose between toast or porridge. She didn't even know what a choice like that felt like. And with that thought, let yourself relax. Because at least tonight, you don't have to wake up tomorrow and gamble your life over breakfast. So yes, finding food wasn't opening a fridge. It was searching for berries that hopefully wouldn't kill you. And if you got it wrong, well, let's just say natural selection handled the rest. If you think taking care of children today is hard, Imagine doing it thousands of years ago. No soft cribs, no diapers, no bottles, no lullabies playing gently from a phone. Just you, a baby, and a cold cave. A cave woman's day with children started before the sun even rose. Babies didn't care about time. They cried in the dark, their small voices echoing off the stone walls. There was no warm blanket to wrap them in, just animal skins that were stiff and smelled of smoke. She would pick up the baby, press it close to her body for warmth, and hope the crying would stop. Feeding was simple, but also endless. No bottles or formula. Just breastfeeding again and again, even when the mother herself was hungry. And if she couldn't feed enough, there was no backup plan. A hungry baby simply cried louder, and there was nothing else to give. And let's not forget, there were no diapers. Babies were wrapped in scraps of hide or just left bare. When they relieved themselves, it went wherever they were lying. But Cavewoman had to clean them with bits of grass or leaves, or simply wipe them with her hands. The smell lingered. It was just part of life. Toddlers were no easier. They didn't understand danger. They would wander close to the fire or the edge of the cave or pick up things they shouldn't. So a cavewoman always had one eye on the child while grinding seeds or scraping hides. One quick mistake could mean an injury or worse, and there were no toys, no colorful distractions. A stick or a small stone was enough to keep a child busy for a moment. Maybe they drew on the cave floor with bits of charcoal. Maybe they played with each other, but there was no real entertainment. Children were often bored, restless, and loud. Sickness was a constant fear. A small fever, a cough, or a wound could be deadly. There were no doctors, no medicine. Only herbs, simple treatments, and hope. Mothers prayed the illness would pass. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. And sleep? Forget peaceful naps. Babies cried at all hours. Toddlers woke up in the night, frightened by the dark. The mother had to soothe them with soft humming, rocking them gently while her own eyes begged for rest. But there were no lullabies, no soft melodies, just her quiet voice and the sound of the wind outside the cave. Caring for multiple children was even harder. Imagine a baby tied to your hip while an older child tugs at your arm, asking for food. Meanwhile, you're trying to keep the fire alive and watch for predators at the same time. Chaos never stopped. Even small daily tasks became harder with children. Gathering water meant carrying a baby along. Foraging for food meant holding a toddler's hand so they didn't wander off. And hunting? That was almost impossible with little ones clinging to you. So most cave women stayed close to the cave, focusing on keeping the children alive while the hunters went out. And there were no breaks, no babysitters, no me time. If you needed to rest, the baby still cried. If you were sick, the children still needed you. There was no one else to step in. The responsibility was constant, but despite the exhaustion, there was love. Cave women cared deeply for their children. They held them close for warmth. They shared whatever food they had, even if it meant going hungry themselves. They protected them from danger, wrapping their arms around them when animals howled outside. Even in the middle of the hardest days, there were small moments of joy. A baby's soft laugh, a toddler's first wobbly steps, the sound of children playing near the cave, pretending a stick was a spear or a stone was a toy. These moments made the struggle feel worth it, even if only for a moment, and the family helped too. Older siblings carried younger ones. Grandmothers shared stories to calm the little ones. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep going. But make no mistake, childcare in the Stone Age was exhausting. It was messy. It was endless. There were no soft beds to place a sleeping baby on, no clean wipes, no warm baths. Just a mother, her tired arms, and the hope that her children would live long enough to grow strong. When evening came, the chaos didn't stop. Babies cried in the night. Toddlers whimpered in their sleep. The mother had to stay alert, listening for both her children and the predators outside. Even in sleep, she never fully rested. Still, she did it all again the next day. Because in that world, there was no other choice. The children were the future of the group. If they didn't survive, the family didn't survive. So cavewomen carried the weight of the future in their tired arms. It's strange to think about it now. Today, there are diapers, bottles, warm blankets, and doctors. There are toys, lullabies, and safe homes. But back then, there was only survival. And yet, they managed. Somehow, despite the cold caves, the hunger, the sickness, and the constant danger, they raised children who grew up, learned to survive, and passed on their knowledge. So the next time you hear a baby crying in a comfortable modern home, remember the cave woman. She held her crying child in a dark cave with no help, no tools, no comfort. And still, she didn't give up. Because even then, even in the hardest times, love for children was strong enough to keep humanity alive. Somehow, humanity still survived. You think your to-do list is long. Take a moment to imagine a cave woman's day. There were no planners, no apps to remind her. But every single day came with an invisible list of things that absolutely had to be done. And unlike today, skipping, one item wasn't just, oh well, I'll do it tomorrow. It was dangerous. It could mean going hungry, getting sick, or even worse. The first item was always the fire. The fire was everything. It kept you warm, it cooked your food, and it scared away animals at night. But it was fragile. It needed feeding, just like a baby. If it went out, there were no matches, no lighters. Starting a new one meant rubbing sticks or striking stones for hours. So before anything else, she checked it. Was it still glowing? Did it need more wood? Could she keep it alive just a little longer? Once the fire was safe, it was time to get water. And no, there was no tap you could just turn on. Water meant walking. Sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. Carrying a heavy pot or a skin made from an animal's stomach, and the water wasn't always clean. Maybe it was from a muddy stream or a cold spring. You still had to bring it back, because without water, nothing else on the list could even start. Then came food. Gathering food wasn't a quick trip to the fridge. It meant hours of foraging, searching for nuts, berries, and edible roots. It meant kneeling in the dirt, digging with your hands, sorting what was safe from what wasn't. And if you were grinding seeds or nuts into something edible, that alone could take all morning. Imagine sitting with a flat stone, crushing handful. After handful, your arms aching. And after all that, you didn't even get much. Just enough to keep everyone alive a little longer. And don't forget clothes. Animal hides didn't magically turn soft and wearable. They needed scraping, cleaning, drying, and stitching. If you didn't do it, you would freeze. So in between gathering and grinding, she sat with sharp stones, working the hides, sewing. With bone needles, making sure her family wouldn't shiver through the cold nights. Then there were tools. Spears broke, knives dulled, baskets tore. There were no stores to buy new ones. If something was damaged, it had to be fixed right away. That meant sharpening stones, weaving new baskets, or shaping sticks into useful tools. If she ignored it, it might not be there when she needed it most. And always there was cleaning. Not the kind of cleaning we do now, with brooms and soap. This was survival cleaning. Keeping the cave floor clear of scraps so it didn't attract animals. Moving waste away from where people slept. Making sure the water pot stayed covered so bugs wouldn't crawl in. Even the small things mattered because the smallest mistake could lead to sickness. All of this was on top of caring for children, helping the elders and staying alert for danger. So when did she rest? She didn't. There was no free time. Quiet moment where she sat down and thought, I'll just relax for a bit. If she stopped working, something else on the list would fall behind. Compare that to today. We complain about being too busy, but somehow we still find time to scroll endlessly on phones, watch videos, or sip coffee in peace. A cave woman would have laughed if she even understood the idea of extra time. For her, time was filled edge to edge with tasks that kept her alive, and the list wasn't just long. It repeated every single day. Keep the fire alive, get water, find food, fix tools, care for children, clean the space, keep watch for predators. And when the sun set, guess what? Tomorrow was the same. Even sleeping didn't really stop the work. At night, she would wake up to check the fire again. Wake up to feed the baby. Wake up at the faintest sound of danger. There was no deep rest. Just light sleep between responsibilities, but here's the quietly funny part. All of this endless work didn't even give her anything close to luxury. After grinding seeds for hours, the end result was a handful of gritty paste. After scraping hides for days, the reward was a stiff piece of clothing that still smelled like an animal. And after fetching heavy loads of water, it still wasn't completely clean. Imagine working all day and still not getting anything perfect. And yet, somehow, there was a rhythm to it. She learned to do these tasks almost without thinking. Her hands moved even when her mind was tired. She didn't ask why. She didn't complain that it was unfair. She just did it because that's what life required. If she wanted to keep her family alive, she had no choice. The fire had to burn, the water had to come, the food had to be found, the tools had to be fixed, and the children had to be watched. It was survival, not a lifestyle. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by a busy day, remember the cave woman's to-do list. It didn't have meetings or emails or shopping trips. It had only the basics: fire, water, food, safety. But every single one of those basics was hard, time-consuming, and exhausting. And if you've ever sat on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through your phone, complaining that you're bored, well, let's just say a cave woman would trade almost anything for even 1 hour of that kind of boredom. Because for her, there was literally no free time. Not a single moment to just sit and do nothing. Life was a loop of tasks that never really ended. So tomorrow, when you look at your own list of chores, take a slow breath. At least you don't have to rub sticks together just to make breakfast. At least your water comes from a tap. At least your clothes don't need scraping with a rock. The cave woman didn't get those small comforts. But she still kept going. She still kept the fire alive, kept the water flowing, and kept her family safe. And somehow, with an endless list written not on paper, but in her tired memory, she managed to keep life moving forward. When you think of prehistoric fashion, maybe you imagine what movies have shown us. Perfectly fitted fur dresses, clean, shiny hair, cave women walking confidently like they're on some kind of ancient runway. But let's take a slow breath and step away from the Hollywood picture. The real fashion of the Stone Age was far from glamorous. There were no fabrics like silk or cotton, no colorful patterns, no neatly tailored outfits. A cave woman's wardrobe was made almost entirely of animal skins, and not the soft, smooth kind you see in designer stores. These were rough, heavy, and stiff. They were made from whatever animal was hunted last: deer, goats, maybe even rabbits. Anything with a hide thick enough to give warmth. And the smell. Oh, yes, let's talk about that. Animal hides never truly stopped smelling like the animal they came from. Even after scraping off the flesh and drying it, there was always a faint odor of smoke, dirt, and something unpleasant. No perfumes, no laundry soap, just nature. If you wore it for days without washing, it only got worse. But in a world with no other options, smell wasn't the biggest problem. Survival was. Now imagine making these clothes. You didn't have shiny scissors or sewing machines. You had sharp stones for cutting, bone needles for stitching, sinew-tough strings pulled from animal tendons for thread. Making a single piece of clothing took hours of hard work. First, you had to scrape the hide clean with a stone. Then you stretched it out to dry, hoping it wouldn't rot. After that, you had to soften it by rubbing it with oils or animal fat. And only then could you cut it into something wearable. And even after all that, the result was still basic. Maybe it was just a simple wrap around the body, tied with a strip of leather. Maybe it was two pieces stitched together to cover the shoulders. No buttons, no zippers, just knots or ties. It was more like wearing a blanket than a fitted outfit. Of course, this didn't mean cave people didn't care at all about how they looked. Sometimes they added small decorations beads made of shells, bits of bone, or colored stones. Maybe a feather tucked into the hair. But let's be honest, these weren't fashion statements. They were small touches to feel human in a harsh world. And shoes, well, if you can call them that. Feet needed protection, especially in the cold. So they wrapped them in scraps of hide or grass. They weren't comfortable. They weren't stylish. But they kept the ground from cutting your feet. Now, here's the funny part. Even though these clothes were simple and practical, modern movies make them look flattering. They show cavewomen with perfectly shaped fur dresses, clean legs, and glossy hair. In reality, clothes were uneven, often patched with random scraps, and hair was rarely brushed. It was probably tangled and full of bits from daily life dust. Leaves, maybe even tiny bugs. Not exactly the image of prehistoric glamour. There were no outfits for different occasions. You didn't have a hunting outfit, a gathering outfit, and a special evening outfit. You had one thing, maybe two, if you were lucky, and you wore it until it wore out. When it tore, you patched it with more scraps. When it finally fell apart, you made another from the next animal that was caught, and cleaning these clothes, forget it. Washing the hide in cold water made it stiff and heavy, so most of the time it wasn't washed at all. It just absorbed more. Smoke from the fire, more dirt from the ground, and more sweat from the body. The smell of the cave and the people inside, it must have been unforgettable. Now let's compare that to modern life. Today we complain if our clothes get a tiny stain. We have closets full of shirts, pants, and dresses for every mood. We have soft fabrics, fresh laundry, and warm dryers. If a sock gets a hole, we throw it away and buy another. A cave woman would have laughed at that luxury. For her, one torn hide could mean days of extra work just to replace it. And think about the weather. In summer, the hides were too hot. In winter, they were never warm enough. There were no light fabrics for heat. No thick winter coats for cold. Just the same piece of skin worn through every season, doing its best to keep out the wind. Still, in a strange way, this rough fashion did its job. It kept people alive. It was strong enough to protect skin from cuts and scratches. It was thick enough to block some of the cold. It was heavy, but it lasted. And it didn't need to look beautiful. It just needed to work. Sometimes cave women added small ornaments, maybe a necklace of shells, maybe bracelets made of tiny bones or teeth. Not because it made them look like models, but because it gave meaning. Maybe it was for luck, maybe for tradition, or maybe just for a little bit of beauty in a life that had so little. So prehistoric fashion wasn't glamorous. It was practical. It was smelly. It was stitched by hand with tools made of stone and bone. It wasn't made to impress anyone. It was made to survive. So the next time you see a movie cave woman in a perfectly cut fur dress, with clean hair and glowing skin, smile quietly. Because the truth is far from that neat picture. The real Stone Age look was messy, rough, and smelled like a mix of smoke and animal fat, but it worked. It kept them alive through cold nights and harsh days. And that's what truly mattered. So, no, there was no prehistoric glamour. Just a woman, her rough animal skins, a bone needle, and the hope that the next hunt would give her another piece to sew. Afternoons in the Stone Age were never lazy. There was no time for naps, no cozy breaks. With tea, for cave women, the afternoon was the time to move, to gather, to hunt, or to keep watch. It was the part of the day when the sun was high, the shadows were short, and the work was far from over. Once the morning tasks were done keeping the fire alive, feeding children, and gathering simple foods, there was still the bigger challenge. Survival. Afternoons often meant venturing beyond the safety of the cave. And stepping outside was always a mix of hope and danger. Sometimes the group went fishing. It sounds peaceful, but it wasn't like sitting by a quiet river with a fishing rod. It was cold water, slippery rocks, and bare hands. They used simple spears or nets woven from plant fibers. Catching even one fish was a victory, something that could feed the family for a day. But it wasn't easy. One wrong step, and you could fall into the water. And in the water, there were more dangers, snakes, sharp stones, or just the chilling cold that left your body weak. Other times it was hunting. Not the kind of hunting we see in modern stories with advanced weapons and safety gear. This was hunting with sharpened sticks and stone tips. It required patience, silence, and teamwork. Cave women often didn't go for the big animals that was left to groups of hunters. Instead, they helped flush out smaller animals like rabbits or birds. But even that was risky. A rabbit might run into thick bushes where snakes hid. A bird might lead you too far from safety, and then there was foraging, the quieter side of survival. Walking through forests or open fields, searching for berries, roots, or edible leaves. It seems calm that even this came with danger. Predators. Liked those same quiet areas. A bush could hide a wildcat. A tree might have a snake coiled on a branch. Even the smallest trip outside meant staying alert to every sound. Yet, strangely, the afternoon could also feel dull. Because sometimes, after hours of walking, there was nothing. No berries, no rabbits, no fish, just empty bushes and dry land. Hunger followed silently, and that quiet hunger was its own kind of danger, creeping in slowly, making everyone weaker for the next day. Imagine the feeling walking in the heat, barefoot or in rough shoes, carrying a baby on your hip while scanning the ground for any sign of food. The air is still. You hear only the rustle of leaves. Every sound makes you tense, wondering if it's an animal or just the wind. The sun feels heavy, pressing down on your back. And at the end of it, you might return with just a handful of roots that don't even fill one's stomach. And always, there was the fear of being watched. Predators hunted too. Wolves, wild cats, even larger animals like bears. They were quiet. Children added another layer to this survival game. While foraging or fishing, they followed close, asking questions, getting distracted, sometimes running toward things they shouldn't. A cave woman had to gather food and keep her children safe. At the same time, one slip, one moment of inattention, and the consequences could be harsh. And then there were other humans. Not all groups were friendly. Sometimes strangers wandered too close. Sometimes they wanted food or territory. So even in the middle of a quiet afternoon, there was a chance of meeting someone who wasn't there to share or help, but there were small moments of peace too. Sitting by the water after fishing, even if nothing was caught, resting under a tree, while gathering leaves, feeling the breeze, watching children play with sticks and stones, laughing even in such a hard life. These little pauses didn't last long, but they made the endless struggle feel a little lighter. By late afternoon, there was a choice. Keep looking, risking more danger as the day grew older, or return to the cave with whatever little was found. The light began to change. Shadows stretched longer. The air grew cooler, and with the evening approaching, the predators started to wake. That was the signal to head back. Sometimes the return was quiet and heavy. No fish, no rabbits, just empty hands. Sometimes it was better a small bundle of food, a few roots, maybe a fish or two. And sometimes, if they were lucky, the hunters returned with meat. But luck wasn't promised, and that's how the afternoon ended. Not with rest, not with relaxation, but with another reminder that survival was never certain. Compare this to modern afternoons. Now, we scroll through phones, watch shows, or complain about being bored. We call it adventure when we go hiking for fun. But for a cave woman, every step outside was an adventure with real risks. It wasn't about enjoyment. It was about staying alive. Afternoons in the Stone Age were a strange mix of tension and waiting. Dangerous because anything could happen. Dull because sometimes nothing did. You could spend hours carefully searching for food and come back with nothing. Or you could step out for a moment and find yourself face to face with a predator. It was survival, not a storybook adventure, and yet they kept going. Every day they faced the same long afternoons, the same dangers, the same quiet fear. And somehow, despite the risks, despite the hunger and the waiting, they made it through. So the next time you sit in your safe home, complaining there's nothing to do, remember the cave woman. Her afternoons were never empty. They were filled with survival, one careful step at a time. And that's how the day passed, half dangerous, half dull, always uncertain. Even in the harsh world of the Stone Age, people still talked. After all the survival tasks were done, after the fire was steady, the children were fed, and the food was gathered, there was always a little time to sit together. And what did they do then? They shared stories, they shared warnings. And yes, they probably gossiped too. Now, it wasn't gossip the way we think of it today. There were no rumors about celebrities or neighbors' new clothes, but there was still curiosity about what others were doing. If someone saw a group of hunters acting strangely, it became a topic of talk. If a family was lucky enough to catch a big animal, everyone knew about it. Word spread quickly, even without written language. Imagine a small group of cave women sitting near the fire in the evening. The children were finally quiet, either asleep or playing with stones. The sky was slowly darkening. This was the only time of day when the heavy work paused for a while. And so they talked. They might start with practical things. I saw paw prints near the river today. Be careful if you go there tomorrow. Or the berries near the old tree are ripe now. These bits of information kept everyone safer. Talking wasn't just for entertainment. It was a way of sharing survival tips, but soon the talk probably shifted. Maybe someone sighed and said he was supposed to bring back meat today, but he came back empty-handed again. Another might nod and reply, "At least yours comes back." Mine disappears for days and then acts like nothing happened. Soft laughter would ripple through the group. Even in the Stone Age, people needed to let out their frustrations, and you can imagine the small jokes. Did you see the way he tripped over that rock today? For someone who calls himself a hunter, he can't even walk straight. A few giggles would follow. That wasn't cruel. It was just a small way to make life feel lighter for a moment. They probably also shared small victories. I caught 2. Fish this afternoon, one might say with pride. Another would respond, "That's more than anyone else caught all week." These little moments of praise made the endless work feel worth it. And then there were the stories. Not gossip, but tales. Maybe they told stories of the day's hunt, making it sound more exciting than it really was. Maybe they told old legends about the stars or the spirits of animals. Stories passed the time, taught lessons, and gave the children something to listen to as they drifted to sleep. Even in such a hard life, there must have been curiosity about others. I saw the other group moving closer to the river. Do you think they'll stay there? Or she made a new kind of basket. Have you seen it? It looks stronger than ours. It wasn't about envy. It was about learning, adapting, and sometimes just keeping conversation alive. And yes, there was likely quiet complaining about partners. After all, cave women worked as hard as the men. They gathered, they cooked, they cared for children, and they still had to deal with hunters who came back tired and grumpy. It's easy to imagine one woman shaking her head and saying, "He promised he'd fix that spear days ago. It's still lying there broken." Another would roll her eyes and say, "They always promise, don't they?" Then they'd laugh, softly, knowing nothing would change. These little moments of talking, of sharing frustrations, jokes and warnings were important. They made them feel connected. Life was already lonely enough, with days full of silent work and quiet fear. So a small circle of voices in the evening made the darkness feel less heavy, and the children listened too. They learned through these talks. They learned where danger was. They learned which foods to avoid. They learned which animals were most feared. And maybe they even learned a little humor from the way adults teased one another. Of course, there was no written record of these conversations. No one will ever know exactly what was said. But we know humans have always been social creatures. Talking is as natural as breathing. Even when life is hard, people find ways to share words, and sometimes it wasn't even about news or warnings. It was just the simple act of sitting together and saying something, anything, so the silence didn't feel so big. When you think about it, this cave gossip wasn't very different from today's small talk. We talk about the weather, about what we saw today, about who did something strange. We complain a little about work or family. We laugh at tiny, silly things. It's the same pattern, just in a different time dot, so imagine it clearly. The cave, glowing faintly with firelight. A few women sitting close, the smell of smoke in the air. Their children curl up nearby, half asleep. Outside, the world is dark and full of unseen animals. But inside, for a little while, there's warmth. There is soft laughter. There are whispers about who did what, who found food, who didn't. It's a very human thing. To talk, to share, to find comfort in words, even in a world where every day was a struggle. So no, prehistoric life wasn't all silent and grim. There were moments of connection, small jokes, quiet stories, and little complaints. These simple conversations reminded them they weren't alone. And somehow, in between all the danger and the endless work, they still found time to talk. Evening in the Stone Age didn't mean guaranteed food. Dinner was not a fixed part of the day. It was more like a question. Will there be anything to eat tonight? As the sun slowly slid behind the hills, the cave grew dim. Shadows stretched long. The air turned cooler. Families waited, watching the paths outside, hoping to see the hunters return. Sometimes you would hear their footsteps early. Sometimes there was only silence. If the hunters came back with meat, it was a good evening. There might be a rabbit, a bird, or if they were very lucky, a larger animal. But many times they returned empty-handed, their faces tired. Then the evening meal was whatever scraps of roots or nuts were left. Some nights there was nothing but water for the cave woman. The evening began with preparation. She checked the fire first, making sure the flames were still alive. Fire was more than light. It was the heart of the evening meal. She gently fed it with dry sticks, blowing softly to make the embers glow brighter. The soft crackling sound was comforting, even when there wasn't much to cook. If meat was brought back, it wasn't clean or ready. It was raw and heavy, still needing to be cut with stone tools. The smell of fresh meat filled the cave, sharp and wild. She worked quietly, slicing pieces and placing them on stones near the fire. There were no pots, no pans, just the most basic way of cooking: heat, smoke, and patience. The children gathered close, their eyes wide. They were hungry. They always were. The warmth of the fire and the smell of food made them restless. "Is it ready yet?" they would ask. She would shake her head gently, knowing it would take time. Meat cooked slowly over flames, too fast and it burned. Too slow and it stayed raw. If there was no meat, she would use whatever else was found. Maybe roots roasted in the embers. Maybe a handful of nuts crushed into a paste. Sometimes it was just berries, shared carefully so everyone got at least a taste. There was no seasoning, no spices to make things taste better. Food was plain, simple. It wasn't about flavor. It was about staying alive. But even so, cooking had its own quiet rhythm. The fire crackled softly. Smoke curled up toward the cave ceiling. The air grew warm and heavy with the scent of whatever little food was there. In the background, you could hear soft whispers, spurs, small conversations about the day, warnings about tomorrow, or simple stories for the children. Dinner time wasn't rushed. It was slow. Carefully turning the meat so it cooked evenly. Carefully moving the roots so they didn't burn. Slowly waiting because there was no way to hurry. In that waiting, there was a strange calmness. When the food was ready, it wasn't served on plates. It was passed hand to hand, a piece of meat here, a small bit of root there. Everyone ate quietly, chewing slowly, making the most of each bite. No one wasted anything. Even the smallest scraps were eaten. Sometimes there wasn't enough for everyone to feel full. Sometimes the mother ate last, only if something was left after the children. And on the worst nights, there was nothing at all. Just the soft glow of the fire and empty stomachs waiting for the next day. Still, even a small meal felt comforting. It meant they had made it through another day. It meant warmth in the belly, even if just for a little while. And in that hard life, even a little comfort mattered. Around the fire, the cave felt safer. Outside was darkness, cold and full of hidden animals. But inside, the firelight flickered on the walls, casting soft shadows. The children sat close to their mothers, leaning against them, tired from the long day. The hunters rested their sore muscles, staring into the flames. After eating, there were no dishes to wash, no tables to clear. The evening meal faded quietly. And tonight, people sat a little longer by the fire, talking in soft voices or humming simple tunes. The fire's glow was the last light before sleep. And if there was nothing to eat that night, the fire still burned. It was still fed with wood. Even an empty stomach found a little peace in the warmth and the familiar sounds of crackling flames. Cooking over firelight had its own beauty. It was simple, primal. No machines, no tools beyond a sharp stone. Just a person, the food they found, and the heat of the flames. The light flickered, making the cave walls dance with shadows. Smoke curled gently upward, carrying the scent of the meal or the memory of one. So dinner wasn't just about eating. It was about gathering. It was the one time everyone came close together. No one wandered off. No one hunted or foraged. For a short time, the family was whole. Compare that to modern life. Now, dinner is a quick stop in a busy schedule, eaten while staring at screens. Back then, it was slow. It was the center of the evening. Even when the meal was small, the moment still felt big. And despite the hunger, despite the danger outside, the firelight made things feel softer. The glow made the cave feel less like a hole in the rock and more like a home. So picture it. The quiet crackle of fire, the slow turning of meat or roots, the soft murmurs of family voices. the smell of smoke and simple food filling the air. The darkness outside growing deeper, but inside, the warmth holding steady. Dinner wasn't fancy. It wasn't certain, but it was enough to remind them that they had survived another day. Dinner. If you were lucky, when the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the world changed. Daylight, even when harsh, felt safe compared to what came after. Night in the Stone Age was different. It was quiet, still, but never truly peaceful. Inside the cave, the fire burned low. Its warm glow flickered across the stone walls, casting moving shadows that almost looked alive. The soft crackle of burning wood was comforting, but it was also the only sound. Outside, everything was silent. Too silent. There were no doors to close, no walls to lock. The entrance to the cave was open, nothing more than a gap in the rock. Beyond that gap was endless darkness. And in that darkness were things that could see you, but you couldn't see them. Wild animals roamed at night. Wolves, big cats, bears. Even smaller creatures like snakes moved quietly under the moonlight. You never knew which ones were close. Sometimes you would hear a low growl or the snap of a branch. Sometimes you heard nothing at all, but you still felt the presence of something waiting. The family gathered closer to the fire. Children curled up against their mothers. Hunters sat quietly, spears within reach. No one spoke much. Words seemed too loud at night. Even a whisper felt risky, like it might carry out into the dark. The fire was the only protection. It kept away some animals, but not all. It gave light, but it also made shadows dance in strange shapes, making you imagine things that weren't there. And when the fire burned low, someone had to feed it. No one liked leaving the warm circle of safety to reach for more wood. Night was also cold. The kind of cold that crawled into your bones. Animal skins helped, but they were never enough. So, families huddled close together, sharing warmth like a single living blanket. And yet, despite the danger, there was a strange calmness in the night. After the endless work of the day, the darkness was a pause. There were no more chores, no more searching for food. Just waiting, just listening. The stars outside shone quietly, unbothered by the fears of those below. Sometimes, the older ones told soft stories by the fire. Tales of the sun returning in the morning. Stories of spirits that guarded the night. It soothed the children, even if the adults knew the dark wasn't friendly. But always, there was that feeling, the feeling that something could come. A pair of glowing eyes in the trees. The soft patting of paws just beyond the firelight. The faint rustle of leaves. You couldn't see it, but you knew it was out there. And there was no way to block it out. No strong walls, no locked doors. Just an open cave mouth. Anyone or anything could walk in. So they took turns keeping watch. Even in sleep, ears stayed open, ready to wake at the slightest sound. Sometimes nights were quiet. The fire stayed bright, the wind was still, and the animals stayed away. Those nights almost felt peaceful. You could hear nothing but breathing and the gentle crackle of wood. But other nights were loud. Wolves howled in the distance, their cries echoing across the hills. Owls screeched. Small animals ran through the grass. Every sound reminded them how fragile their safety really was, and the darkness itself was heavy. It wasn't like the soft dark of modern homes. It was pure blackness, stretching endlessly. When the fire went dim, you couldn't see your own hands. The cave was just a void. That kind of dark played tricks on your mind. It made shapes out of nothing. It made you feel watched even when no one was there. Children would sometimes wake crying. They dreamed of strange shapes or heard noises outside. Mothers soothed them quietly, rocking them close. But inside, they felt the same fear. They just didn't show it. Night also brought another kind of worry, the unknown. You didn't know if the hunters who left earlier would return. You didn't know if the group would have food tomorrow. You didn't know if an animal would find you before sunrise. In the dark, all those thoughts felt heavier, and yet somehow they rested. Bodies too tired from the day finally gave in. Sleep came in light waves, never deep, never safe. One ear always stayed awake, listening for danger. The fire would burn low again. Someone would quietly get up, add another stick, then return to the group, curling back into the warmth of others. This small routine kept them alive through the night. Even with fear around them, there was also a sense of togetherness. Families huddled close, protecting one another. The firelight reflected in their eyes, soft and tired. Outside was wildness. Inside was all they had, each other. Sometimes they looked at the stars through the cave entrance. Tiny points of light scattered across the sky. They didn't understand what they were, but they gave hope. Maybe they believed the stars watched over them. Maybe they believed the moon guided the hunters back home. And slowly, hour by hour, the darkness passed. Every night ended the same way, quietly, uncertainly. No one knew if the darkness would stay peaceful or if the next sound would be danger creeping closer. Night in the Stone Age was both calm and terrifying. It was a time of rest, but never safety. A time of quiet, but never silence. So imagine lying there on the hard ground, the cold pressing into your skin, the faint smell of smoke in the air. Your family breathes softly beside you, the fire glows faintly, and outside the cave, the darkness waits. They fell asleep not knowing if the next day would come. After all this, you might be wondering, was life for a cave woman really that bad? Well, let's think about it slowly. She woke up on a cold, uneven stone floor. No soft mattress, no warm blanket, just animal skins that smelled of smoke and dirt. Her alarm clock wasn't a gentle tone on a phone. It was the cry of a hungry baby or the distant growl of an animal. Her morning routine wasn't skincare and coffee. It was blowing on faint fire embers so they didn't go out. It was gathering water from a muddy stream. It was making sure no predator had crept too close in the night. Breakfast? Forget it. There was no fridge, no cupboard. She had to search for berries, dig up roots, or chew on leftovers from the day before if there were any. And every bite came with the small risk of poison. And the work didn't stop. Ever. Fire to keep alive, water to fetch, tools to fix. Children to care for, clothes to scrape and stitch, food to find. Repeat that every single day. No holidays, no lazy Sundays. No time for boredom. Afternoons were spent in survival mode, fishing with bare hands, hunting with simple spears, or foraging. In the heat while staying alert for snakes and wild cats. And if you came back empty-handed, too bad. You went hungry. Evenings weren't cozy dinners at a table. They were slow moments around a fire, hoping the hunters brought something to eat. If they didn't, you just drank water and tried not to think about how empty your stomach felt. And nights? Nights were the hardest. No doors, no locks. Just darkness and the quiet knowledge that something with teeth might be outside. Sleep was light, uneasy. One ear always stayed awake, waiting for trouble. So yes, it was hard. Really hard. Now compare that to today. You wake up in a warm bed. You stretch lazily and reach for a glass of clean water that came from a tap. You brush your teeth with mini toothpaste. You take a hot shower. You pick clothes from a closet full of options. And then you open a fridge stocked with food from all over the world. You don't have to hunt. You don't have to gather. You don't have to scrape hides or sharpen stone tools. You don't have to sleep in fear of wolves scratching at your door. And yet we still complain. We sigh when the Wi-Fi is slow. We feel annoyed when the coffee isn't the right temperature. We groan about having too much work when it mostly involves sitting at a desk. A cave woman would probably laugh at us. Or maybe she wouldn't have time to laugh because she'd be too busy keeping her children alive. Soft sarcasm aside, there's a strange beauty in how they lived. They were strong without even thinking about it. They understood the land because they had to. They relied on each other. There was no endless distraction, no meaningless noise. Just survival, family, and the rhythm of nature, but let's not romanticize it too much. It wasn't magical. It wasn't peaceful. It was exhausting. It was dangerous. It was uncertain. One bad hunt, one wrong berry, one cold night, and everything could end. And yet, somehow, humanity made it through. Cavewomen passed down knowledge. They raised children in impossible conditions. They kept the fire alive day after day so that the next generation could have a chance. Without them, there would be no us. So was it really that bad? Yes, it was hard in ways we can barely imagine. But it was also simple. No endless choices. No constant noise. Just life stripped down to its most basic form. Survival. And now, here you are, sitting in a safe home, a roof over your head, a bed waiting for you, maybe a warm drink nearby, maybe your phone in your hand, glowing softly. Think about it. If you want food, you open a fridge or tap your phone to order it. If you want light, you flip a switch. If you're cold, you turn on the heater. And if you're scared of the dark, you lock your door and know you're safe. A cave woman would have given anything for that. At least you have a bed, a roof, and Wi-Fi. Cave woman would have killed for that. So tonight, when you lie down, remember her. Remember the woman who slept on stone, who kept her children alive with nothing but her hands, who faced a world full of danger and still managed to survive. Her life was messy, hard, and uncertain. Yours is warm, soft, and filled with comforts. She could never dream of. So now, close your eyes. At least you're not sleeping on cold stone tonight.